There comes a moment when silence speaks louder than every argument, every apology, and every unanswered message. It is the moment when two people stop reaching for one another, not because the story is over, but because something deeper has begun. When an avoidant and an empath both choose no contact, the world assumes the connection has died. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible battle quietly unfolds. One is learning what it means to feel without running. The other is learning what it means to love without losing themselves. What happens next is rarely what anyone expects. Most people believe that whoever breaks the silence first is the weaker one. They think distance is simply a game of patience, pride, or emotional endurance. But true no contact is not about winning someone back. It is not about punishment, revenge, or proving who cared more. It becomes a mirror that reveals the hidden patterns each person has carried for years. In the absence of constant communication, every distraction disappears and both individuals are left face to face with the parts of themselves they have spent a lifetime avoiding. The avoidant discovers that escaping another person does not silence the emotions buried within. The empath discovers that constantly saving others has often meant abandoning themselves. While the world sees two people growing apart, something far more meaningful is taking place within them. One begins to understand the cost of emotional distance. The other begins to understand the value of emotional boundaries. The silence that once felt empty slowly transforms into a place where real change becomes possible. Today, we will explore what truly happens when an avoidant and an empath both commit to no contact. We will uncover the psychological shifts that occur behind the scenes, why silence affects each of them so differently, and how this unexpected distance can either become the end of an unhealthy cycle or the beginning of profound personal transformation. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to discover may completely change the way you understand relationships, attachment, and the power of walking away. When an avoidant and an empath both enter a period of no contact, the silence is never truly empty. It becomes a space where distractions fade, excuses lose their strength, and emotional patterns that were once hidden begin to reveal themselves. During the relationship, both individuals often play roles that prevent them from seeing their own wounds clearly. The empath focuses on understanding, fixing, and rescuing, while the avoidant focuses on maintaining distance, protecting independence, and escaping emotional intensity. As long as these roles continue, both people remain occupied with each other instead of themselves. No contact interrupts this cycle. Suddenly, there is no one to blame, no conversation to distract the mind, and no immediate emotional reaction to chase. What remains is the truth each person has been carrying long before they ever met. The empath usually believes that love can heal anything. They invest energy into understanding the other person's fears, making excuses for inconsistent behavior, and hoping that enough patience will eventually create security. This belief often comes from a deeper wound that has little to do with the current relationship. Somewhere in the past, affection may have felt conditional, approval may have depended on being helpful, understanding, or emotionally available. Over time, this creates the unconscious belief that love must be earned rather than received freely. The empath begins measuring their worth by how much they can give instead of how peacefully they can exist. During no contact, this painful belief begins to surface because there is no longer anyone to save. Without daily communication, the empath notices how much of their emotional energy revolved around another person's moods, responses, and attention. Every moment that was once spent analyzing messages now becomes a moment spent facing uncomfortable emotions. They may feel anxious without understanding why. They may repeatedly imagine conversations that never happened. They may wonder whether they should reach out one more time. Yet beneath these thoughts lies something much deeper. The fear is not only about losing another person, It is about confronting the possibility that they have forgotten how to feel complete without someone needing them. The avoidant experiences silence in a completely different way. At first, no contact can feel like relief. The emotional pressure disappears. There are no expectations to answer messages, explain feelings, or participate in difficult conversations. Freedom seems comforting because distance has always been the strategy used to regulate overwhelming emotions. Yet this sense of relief often hides another reality. The absence of conflict does not erase emotional attachment. It simply delays the moment when those emotions begin demanding attention. Avoidant individuals often convince themselves that leaving difficult situations behind means they have moved on. They become skilled at staying busy, focusing on work, hobbies, or new experiences. Outwardly, they appear calm and unaffected. Inwardly, however, unresolved emotions remain untouched. Human emotions do not disappear simply because they are ignored. They settle beneath awareness, waiting patiently until silence removes every distraction. During no contact, moments of stillness become impossible to escape. A familiar place, a meaningful song, or an unexpected memory suddenly awakens emotions that seemed absent only days before. This is where the real wounds begin revealing themselves. The avoidant starts recognizing that the distance they created protected them from vulnerability, but also prevented genuine intimacy. Every relationship that ended because of emotional withdrawal begins forming a pattern rather than appearing as isolated events. The realization is uncomfortable because it challenges the identity they have carefully built. Independence no longer feels like strength when it becomes clear that it has often been another name for emotional self-protection. Meanwhile, the empath begins recognizing a different pattern. They notice how often they ignored their own needs to preserve harmony. They remember every time they accepted inconsistent affection because they believed understanding was more important than boundaries. They begin seeing how easily compassion transformed into self-sacrifice. What once felt like unconditional love now appears as a cycle where personal peace was repeatedly exchanged for temporary connection. Silence as an unusual way of removing illusions. During the relationship, both individuals often believed the other person was the source of every emotional struggle. The empath believed the avoidant's distance caused all their anxiety. The avoidant believed the empath's emotional intensity caused all their discomfort. No contact creates enough space for a different perspective to emerge. Each person slowly realizes they were carrying these emotional tendencies long before the relationship began. The relationship merely exposed them. For the empath, abandonment becomes the deepest wound revealed by silence. Every unanswered message seems to awaken memories that reach far beyond the current situation. They begin noticing that the fear of being left has influenced countless decisions throughout life. It shaped friendships, family relationships, and romantic choices. It encouraged people-pleasing, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. The silence becomes painful because it forces them to witness how much of their identity has depended upon external reassurance. For the avoidant, vulnerability becomes the deepest wound exposed by distance. They begin noticing how instinctively they pull away whenever emotional closeness increases. They remember previous relationships where affection gradually transformed into pressure in their mind, even when no real threat existed. They recognize that emotional distance has become an automatic defense rather than a conscious decision. Instead of asking whether someone else is too demanding, they begin wondering why genuine intimacy feels unsafe. Neither realization happens quickly. The human mind naturally resists uncomfortable truths. Both individuals may initially distract themselves with blame, anger, or fantasies about reconciliation. The empath may believe they simply need one final conversation to feel better. The avoidant may convince themselves that replacing the relationship with another distraction will solve everything. Yet silence continues performing its quiet work. Day after day, it strips away explanations that once seemed convincing. It reveals patterns that are impossible to ignore forever. One of the greatest lessons hidden within no contact is that emotional pain often acts as a teacher rather than an enemy. The empath begins learning that loneliness is different from abandonment. Being alone does not automatically mean being unworthy. They slowly discover moments where peace exists without constant reassurance. They begin realizing that love should not require endless emotional labor. Boundaries stop feeling selfish and begin feeling necessary. The avoidant gradually learns that vulnerability is different from weakness. Feeling deeply does not mean losing independence. Emotional closeness does not automatically lead to loss of identity. They begin understanding that avoiding pain has also meant avoiding genuine connection. Every wall built for protection has also blocked the possibility of experiencing authentic intimacy. As these truths emerge, both individuals experience moments of resistance. The empath may feel tempted to return to familiar patterns simply because they are comfortable. The avoidant may feel tempted to disappear even further whenever emotions become intense. Growth rarely feels natural because it requires abandoning behaviors that once created a sense of safety. Yet every moment spent sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it weakens old emotional habits. The silence eventually becomes more than the absence of communication. It becomes an environment where hidden fears lose their disguises. The empath no longer sees themselves only as the giver. The avoidant no longer sees themselves only as the independent one. They begin recognizing themselves as human beings carrying unresolved wounds that influenced every interaction, every misunderstanding, and every emotional reaction throughout the relationship. No contact is often misunderstood as a strategy designed to influence another person's behavior. Many believe it is a psychological game meant to create longing, trigger regret, or force reconciliation. While these outcomes may sometimes occur, they are not the deepest purpose of silence. For an empath and an avoidant, no contact creates something far more significant. It interrupts emotional habits that have quietly controlled both people for years. The empath is forced to confront an attachment that has become part of their identity, while the avoidant is forced to face the illusion that emotional distance gives them complete control over their life and feelings. The empath usually enters the relationship with an open heart. They believe understanding can overcome almost every obstacle. When conflict appears, they naturally look inward, asking themselves what they could have done differently. If the avoidant becomes distant, the empath often assumes they simply need to become more patient, more supportive, or more understanding. They begin investing increasing amounts of emotional energy into preserving the connection. Every unanswered message becomes something to analyze. Every brief moment of affection becomes a sign that hope still exists. Over time, this pattern slowly transforms from love into emotional dependency. Attachment is rarely recognized while it is happening. It disguises itself as loyalty, compassion, and commitment. The empath convinces themselves that refusing to give up is proof of genuine love. Yet beneath this determination often lies an unconscious fear of letting go. They begin believing that if they stop trying, the relationship will disappear forever, and with it, a part of their own identity. Their happiness gradually becomes tied to another person's emotional availability. Peace becomes conditional, self-worth becomes dependent upon whether someone else chooses closeness or distance. This is why no contact feels so overwhelming in the beginning. It removes the emotional routine the empath has unconsciously relied upon. There are no messages to interpret, no opportunities to prove devotion, and no emotional crises demanding immediate attention. At first, this absence creates anxiety because the mind continues searching for the familiar cycle it has grown accustomed to. The empath may constantly check their phone, revisit old conversations, or replay memories in search of reassurance. They mistake this emotional discomfort for evidence that they cannot live without the relationship. In reality, what they are experiencing is withdrawal from emotional attachment. Just as the body reacts when a familiar habit suddenly disappears, the mind reacts when a long-established emotional pattern is interrupted. The craving is not necessarily for the person alone. It is for the emotional cycle that has defined daily life. The constant hope, worry, disappointment, and temporary relief have become psychologically familiar. No contact removes these emotional highs and lows, forcing the empath to experience something they may have avoided for years. Emotional stillness. At first, stillness feels uncomfortable because it exposes thoughts that were previously hidden beneath constant relationship concerns. The empath begins noticing how often they ignored their own dreams while focusing on another person's healing. They remember interests they abandoned, friendships they neglected, and personal goals they postponed while trying to maintain the relationship. Slowly, a powerful realization begins forming. Their entire emotional world had become organized around someone else's needs. This awareness is painful because it challenges the image they have always held of themselves. They believed they were simply loving deeply. Instead, they begin recognizing moments where love crossed into self-neglect. Every compromise seemed small at the time, yet together they created a life where personal peace depended upon another person's choices. No contact interrupts this unhealthy attachment by removing the possibility of continuing the same cycle. As days become weeks, something unexpected begins happening. The empath discovers moments of calm that no longer depend on receiving affection or reassurance. They realize they can enjoy simple experiences without constantly wondering what someone else is thinking. Their attention gradually returns to themselves. They begin asking questions they have ignored for years. What truly makes them happy? What kind of relationships feel safe? What boundaries have they been afraid to establish? These questions slowly replace the obsessive need to understand another person's behavior. While the empath is breaking emotional attachment, the avoidant is confronting something entirely different. Their greatest illusion has always been the belief that maintaining distance gives them complete control. Whenever emotional closeness becomes overwhelming, they withdraw. Whenever conflict appears, they create space. Whenever vulnerability feels risky, they protect themselves by becoming emotionally unavailable. This strategy often works in the short term because physical distance creates temporary emotional relief. The avoidant begins believing they have mastered their emotions simply because they rarely express them. They confuse emotional suppression with emotional stability. They assume independence means needing no one. They convince themselves that walking away proves strength rather than fear. Yet no contact gradually exposes the weakness hidden within this illusion. Control built upon avoidance is fragile because it depends upon constant escape. As long as distractions exist, unresolved emotions remain buried. Work, hobbies, entertainment, travel, or new relationships temporarily occupy the mind. However, silence slowly removes these distractions. Unexpected memories appear without warning. Familiar places trigger emotions that were never processed. Quiet evenings become opportunities for reflection instead of escape. The avoidant begins realizing that leaving a relationship does not automatically leave behind emotional attachment. Physical distance cannot erase meaningful experiences. Every conversation avoided eventually returns in memory. Every feeling ignored patiently waits beneath awareness. They may appear calm on the outside, while internally wrestling with emotions they have never learned to understand. This realization weakens the illusion of control. If emotional pain can still appear despite creating distance, then perhaps avoidance never truly solved the problem. It merely postponed it. The avoidant slowly recognizes that emotional freedom cannot be achieved by running away from vulnerability. Real control comes from understanding emotions rather than escaping them. Many avoidants experience delayed grief during no contact. While the empath often feels pain immediately, the avoidant's emotional response frequently emerges much later. Initially, relief dominates because pressure has disappeared. Weeks or months later, loneliness quietly replaces relief. They begin missing not only the relationship, but also the emotional safety that genuine connection once offered, even if they struggled to appreciate it while it existed. The absence becomes more noticeable because no contact removes opportunities to maintain partial emotional access. There are no casual conversations, no occasional messages, and no reassurance that the other person remains available. The finality of silence forces the avoidant to recognize what emotional distance has truly cost them. They begin understanding that every wall built to prevent pain has also prevented closeness. This process often creates inner conflict. One part of them wants connection. Another part fears vulnerability. They may consider reaching out, then immediately convince themselves it is unnecessary. They may remember meaningful moments, only to distract themselves before emotions become too strong. This internal struggle reveals that their emotional world has never been as controlled as they once believed. Meanwhile, the empath continues transforming. Instead of measuring love by sacrifice, they begin measuring it by mutual respect. Instead of chasing emotional availability, they begin protecting their own emotional peace. They discover that genuine intimacy does not require constant effort from one person while the other remains emotionally distant. Healthy relationships no longer appear as endless projects needing repair. The most remarkable aspect of no contact is that both individuals begin losing the identities they unconsciously depended upon. The empath stops defining themselves as the rescuer. The avoidant stops defining themselves as the untouchable, independent person. Without these familiar roles, both experience uncertainty. Yet uncertainty also creates space for something new to emerge. The empath develops emotional independence, recognizing that self-worth cannot be borrowed from another person's affection. The avoidant develops emotional awareness, recognizing that strength is not measured by how successfully emotions are hidden, but by how honestly they are understood. Their separate journeys unfold in different ways, yet both are guided by the same silence that refuses to let old patterns continue unchanged. No contact becomes far more than a period without communication. It becomes the force that dismantles emotional dependence in one person and dismantles emotional avoidance in the other. It strips away comforting illusions until each individual is left facing the habits, fears, and beliefs that quietly shaped every interaction, every misunderstanding, and every decision they made throughout the relationship. When two people enter no contact, most attention is placed on one question: who will come back first? Friends speculate, social media offers endless predictions, and emotions become consumed by the possibility of reunion. Yet this question overlooks something far more important. The future of the relationship is rarely determined by who reaches out first. It is determined by who uses the silence to become a different person. The one who grows the most during separation changes the entire direction of what happens next, whether the relationship is rebuilt or permanently left behind. Growth is often mistaken for the passage of time. Many people assume that weeks or months of silence automatically create emotional maturity. Time alone changes very little. A person can spend an entire year repeating the same emotional patterns internally while appearing calm on the outside. Real growth requires awareness, honesty, and the willingness to question deeply rooted beliefs. No contact merely creates the opportunity. What each individual chooses to do with that opportunity determines everything that follows. The empath enters this period carrying an invisible burden. Their instinct tells them that relationships survive through effort. If communication has stopped, their mind immediately begins searching for ways to repair what feels broken. They replay conversations repeatedly, wondering which words caused the distance. They imagine different outcomes if they had been more patient, more understanding, or more forgiving. Every memory becomes another attempt to solve a problem that no longer exists in the present moment. At first, this reflection appears productive, but much of it is driven by self-blame rather than genuine understanding. The empath assumes responsibility for emotions that never truly belong to them. They carry another person's fears as though they were their own. This habit often extends far beyond romantic relationships. Throughout life, they may have become the emotional caretaker in friendships, family dynamics, and professional environments. Their identity becomes closely connected to fixing what others struggle to face. Growth begins the moment the empath notices this pattern without defending it. They recognize that compassion does not require self-abandonment. Supporting another person should never demand sacrificing inner peace. They begin asking a different question. Instead of wondering how they can become enough for someone else, they begin asking whether the relationship was ever enough for them. This shift transforms everything. They stop viewing boundaries as rejection and begin seeing them as self-respect. They understand that protecting emotional energy is not selfish, but necessary. Every day spent honoring personal limits strengthens an inner confidence that previously depended upon external validation. They gradually stop waiting for another person to define their worth. As emotional independence grows, something remarkable happens. The constant need for answers begins disappearing. The empath no longer feels driven to know why every conversation ended or why every mixed signal occurred. They understand that some questions cannot create healing, even if they receive perfect explanations. Closure becomes something built from personal acceptance rather than another person's words. The avoidant experiences an entirely different challenge. Their growth does not begin with emotional intensity, but with emotional absence. At first, silence seems comfortable because it resembles the distance they have always used to regain control. They tell themselves they are simply moving forward. They focus on practical responsibilities and maintain the appearance of stability. Yet beneath this calm lies an important question they have spent years avoiding. Why does emotional closeness feel threatening in the first place? Many avoidants have never seriously examined this question because withdrawal has always provided immediate relief. Whenever vulnerability increases, distance reduces anxiety. The strategy appears effective because discomfort temporarily fades. However, repeated escape prevents deeper understanding. No contact eventually removes the possibility of blaming circumstances or another person's behavior. Alone with their thoughts, they begin recognizing recurring patterns that have followed them through multiple relationships. They remember moments when genuine affection unexpectedly created fear instead of comfort. They notice how compliments sometimes felt overwhelming rather than reassuring. They realize they often interpreted emotional needs as demands, even when those needs were expressed calmly. These observations gradually expose an uncomfortable truth. The greatest obstacle has never been another person's emotions. It has been their own relationship with vulnerability. Real growth for the avoidant begins when emotional discomfort is no longer treated as an emergency requiring escape. Instead of distracting themselves, they remain present with difficult feelings. They allow sadness to exist without immediately replacing it with activity. They notice loneliness without convincing themselves they prefer complete independence. Every moment spent acknowledging emotion weakens the automatic habit of emotional withdrawal. This transformation requires tremendous courage because vulnerability challenges an identity built upon self-protection. The avoidant has often believed strength means needing nothing from anyone. They have measured independence by emotional distance rather than emotional security. During no contact, they begin discovering another possibility. True independence allows closeness without fear, because self-worth no longer depends upon avoiding emotional risk. While both individuals grow separately, their internal changes begin reshaping the future of the relationship itself. Imagine two people reconnecting without changing anything within themselves. The empath resumes overgiving. The avoidant resumes withdrawing. The same misunderstandings return because the same emotional patterns remain alive. Time apart accomplishes nothing if awareness never develops. Now imagine something different. The empath returns with healthy boundaries. They no longer chase inconsistent affection. They communicate needs clearly without apologizing for having them. Their confidence no longer depends upon constant reassurance. They enter conversations prepared to accept honesty rather than desperately seeking approval. The avoidant returns having developed emotional awareness. They recognize discomfort without immediately creating distance. They communicate uncertainty instead of disappearing. They understand that intimacy requires openness rather than perfection. They begin participating in emotional conversations instead of escaping them. These two versions of themselves create an entirely different relationship because the people entering it are no longer the same individuals who left it. Growth changes communication, expectations, reactions, and emotional responsibility. The relationship evolves only because the individuals have evolved first. There is another possibility that often surprises people. Sometimes growth leads not toward reconciliations, but toward peaceful release. The empath may discover they no longer desire the relationship they once desperately fought to preserve. What once appeared irreplaceable now appears incompatible with the life they are creating. Their standards have changed because self-respect has grown stronger than emotional attachment. The avoidant may also reach a similar realization. They may understand that they were not prepared for the level of intimacy the relationship required. Instead of blaming themselves or the other person, they accept this truth with maturity. They recognize that healing cannot be rushed simply because loneliness appears. They understand that another relationship entered without inner change would likely repeat familiar patterns. This is why growth always shapes the future, regardless of whether reunion occurs. Personal transformation ensures that the next chapter unfolds differently. The same emotional traps lose their power because awareness now exists where unconscious habits once ruled. The past no longer dictates every decision because new understanding has replaced automatic reactions. Many people wait for another person to change before allowing themselves to move forward. They postpone healing until they receive an apology, an explanation, or a second chance. Yet this mindset quietly hands over control of personal growth to someone else. True transformation begins when responsibility returns inward. The empath cannot control whether the avoidant becomes emotionally available. The avoidant cannot control whether the empath remains open to reconciliation. Each person controls only one thing: the willingness to become healthier than they were yesterday. The deepest lesson hidden within no contact is not about winning another person's love. It is about becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves in pursuit of love. The empath learns that genuine connection begins with self-respect rather than endless sacrifice. The avoidant learns that lasting intimacy begins with courage rather than emotional distance. Whoever embraces these lessons most completely becomes the person whose future is no longer controlled by old fears, old wounds, or old relationship patterns, because lasting change always belongs to the individual who chooses growth over comfort, awareness over denial, and transformation over repetition.